So it has been 1 month since the Nintendo Switch 2 has come out. And I feel like a lot of people are wondering, hey, is the system still good 1 month later? How was it within the first month? Is it a good system? Is it something that I can recommend? How do I feel about the Nintendo Switch 2? And I feel like in today's video, I'm gonna give you guys a very good video discussing all things Nintendo Switch 2 within the first month of this system's release. But before we jump into that, I have to ask, we're trying to hit 22,000 subscribers by the end of July. It's a big ask because we're not that far into it. If you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel. If not, that's okay. Let's dive right into talking about the Nintendo Switch 2. We're going to be diving into the good and the bad when it comes to talking about this bad boy right here. So hopefully it's enough to please you guys and figure out if it's something you should be picking up for yourself. So let's start off with the Nintendo Switch 2 games. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to purchase every single Nintendo Switch 2 game that came out on launch day, but I know that not everyone is going to be able to do that, especially with the economy that's going on right now. So I feel like my review is going to be different than other people out there because I got the opportunity to play every single game that came out for this system when I know a lot of people did not get that privilege of being able to do that. Now, this portion isn't me talking about every single Switch 2 game and how I feel about it. This is more talking about the launch lineup. Everything that I held right there was what came out on the system on day one. And honestly, I feel like the games that was released had it be one of the best Nintendo launches out there. Now, there's better launches out there, of course, but I feel like over the previous last few consoles that Nintendo has come out, such as the Wii U and definitely the Switch 1, the Switch 2 was able to make such a better launch lineup of games from a first-party standpoint with something like Mario Kart, and a third-party perspective with games like Cyberpunk, Split Fiction, and Yakuza. And I'm sure there's going to be complaints out there that some of these titles that came out for the system were remasters / ports of things that came out years ago. But my response to that is it still had games that had just came out around the time. One of those games being Split Fiction, which is arguably going to be nominated for Game of the Year. And honestly, I don't think it's going to win, but could be a Game of the Year winner. And I think that's pretty cool that the Switch 2 was able to get one of those games within the first day of its system. Now, I want to talk about this in a more realistic approach, because I know, as we said, that not everyone's going to be able to buy these games. I feel like after all the research and numbers that have come out, it's likely that most people only just got the Mario Kart bundle and no other game. And I do want to talk about Mario Kart for just a minute or two because of that. Mario Kart was obviously the game that Nintendo wanted the system to release with, which honestly made a lot of sense. It was the most popular Nintendo Switch 1 game, with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I think, selling over 60 million units, which is crazy numbers. So the fact that the Switch 2 was able to launch with a Mario Kart, a new Mario Kart that is, not even a remaster, was a pretty big deal, and it was a good business decision from Nintendo. However, I can't help but point out and show that not necessarily Mario Kart is for everyone. Yes, you know, it's rated E for everyone. It's the family game to have. It's a multiplayer game. But I feel like I have to bring up into this video that from a single player perspective, they tried to put single player stuff into Mario Kart World, but I feel like for those single player people that like to play story-based games, the Switch 2 did not have that when you look at an exclusive first-party standpoint. Now, I will say, if you haven't had the opportunity to play something like Cyberpunk 2077, that is something that I would highly recommend you pick up with Mario Kart as your other go-to Switch 2 game. But I think it's important to point out within the launch that maybe not everyone's going to want to have a multiplayer kart racing game, as I feel like in most launches, you typically get a single player story-driven game. However, it's been shown that they did not need to have that, as the Nintendo Switch 2 was a massive success, bringing one of the biggest console launches ever. Not to mention, Nintendo is releasing that big single-player story-driven game about a few weeks from now with Donkey Kong Bonanza. So I feel like that complaint is probably not a big deal, but I feel like if you were an owner for the first month of the Switch 2 and maybe not big into multiplayer, you probably were affected by that and was hoping to have something from Nintendo directly rather than these third-party companies. Let's talk about one of the bad things of Nintendo Switch 2 when it comes to the games. You got things such as game key cards. Now obviously this has probably been the most controversial thing of the Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo implemented a system to where third-party devs didn't have to put their games fully on cartridge or partially on cartridge. They gave their developers two options. A 64 gigabyte cartridge, which is gonna cost probably close to $20, if not over $20, depends how much you order in a bulk, of course. Or you could go the cheaper route, which is a game key card, which is probably a few pennies. Like, game key cards probably cost them nothing. And a lot of developers went with that path because 64 gigabyte cartridges are very expensive and also just very unnecessary if you think about some of the games out there, such as Puyo Puyo Tetris. That's a 2 gigabyte game, doesn't need 64 gigabytes. But because of that decision, it ended up being very controversial as a lot of people was upset from the physical game side of things. And honestly, I'm very upset about it too. And I'm hoping that maybe within the next few months, Nintendo releases options for developers to have more sizes for when it comes to cartridge sizes. Because that's ultimately the main issue. If Nintendo would give more options for that, we wouldn't be seeing these game key cards. And game key cards was supposed to help the developers make more physical, however you want to look at it, games. But it seems like it's just made matters worse because now there's something else that's becoming more common. And if you hold my Split Fiction release here, you'll notice that it's not a physical game. It's not a game key card. It's a code and box. This is becoming a very common thing as of right now when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2 releases, which has overall been not a fun time to see with these games. And as someone that has a giant shelf of games, I'm hoping that game key cards is not the future, but at least all of the first-party Nintendo games will fully be on cartridge. Game key cards is definitely something I do not like about the Nintendo Switch 2, especially if you consider the storage of this system. The storage is gonna go out so quick. Even if you had a 1 terabyte SD card, your storage is not gonna last forever because of how big these games continue to get bigger. Honestly, one of the worst decisions from Nintendo, and I don't know if it's gonna get fixed. I think it's gonna take a year from now to fix this whole cartridge size issue. And it's gonna lead to a lot of third-party games being game key cards because of Nintendo's stupidity. The last thing that I wanna talk about when it comes to the games is the release date calendar that we have for the Nintendo Switch 2. I feel like when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2, when it comes to figuring out the release dates for these games, I feel like this has been probably one of the worst times that Nintendo has done with the system, because as of right now, the only games that we know about that are coming, like we know we have a lot of games coming out this year, but we have 0 release dates. We know Donkey Kong Bonanza is coming out on July 17th, and then Drag X Drive comes out on August 14th. They're not done a very good job of telling you when these games are going to be available and be able to be played into your hands, basically. Because with the Switch 1, I feel like they did a very good job of telling fans when these games were gonna come out, and it was letting fans know, hey, you have this giant library of games coming out within the first year of the system. I feel like with the Switch 2, when it comes to the first-party games, and honestly, third-party as well, we really have no idea what's coming out with the release date, stuff like that. I'm sure there's going to be a Nintendo Direct coming out in the next few weeks that will change that, but looking from a first month perspective of owning this system, Nintendo did a very poor job of explaining and giving constant updates on a release calendar of games. And I know that games like Kirby, Hyrule Warriors, Drag X Drive, stuff like that had the 2025, but we didn't even have a month or a timeline of when it's coming out this year. All right, let's go on to the next thing regarding the Nintendo Switch 2. Something that honestly has just now started being talked about, which to me makes it feel like it's not a big deal, but let's talk about it. The Nintendo Switch 2 screen. This has been probably the most discussed thing other than game key cards right now, due to Digital Foundry doing a video regarding the Nintendo Switch 2 LCD screen, which I think something to point out that Nintendo went with instead of an OLED is they went with LCD. Now, granted, I feel like the combination of HDR and how beautiful the 1080p looks onto this screen help the fact that this does not have OLED, but there's something that's going on with the Nintendo Switch 2 screen that people are finding out. There's a ghost effect. Digital Foundry did a whole video where they analyzed the Nintendo Switch 2 screen, and it's come to find out that there's major ghost effects within its screen. But guess what, guys? It took 3 weeks to find this out. And the only time that you can find this thing out is when you slow down the footage to see the ghost effect. So what I say to that is that this screen controversy that's going on right now is one of the stupidest controversial things with Nintendo right now. Because, like I said, was not a problem before, but the fact someone found this 3 weeks later, oh, the screen's a problem now. No one noticed it, no one still notices it, and the only way to notice it is if you're slowing something down, which you don't have the capability to do something like that unless you're filming and editing, of course. So in my opinion, the screen is not a bad thing. Yes, I would like OLED onto the Nintendo Switch 2 screen, but I felt like, to me personally, coming from an OLED Switch and having a Steam Deck OLED, I did not think it was as noticeable not having OLED onto this, as I thought it was going to be a big problem, but ended up being not too bad, not too noticeable. So I'm a fan of the screen, but I would like Nintendo to put OLED onto this system at some point. The next thing I want to talk about are the brand new JoyCons, which we will take off now. I mean, look at this, dude. This is so satisfying. So satisfying with the magnets too. Amazing. All right, let's actually talk about the Nintendo Switch 2 JoyCons for real. One of the brand new things with the JoyCons is the fact that it is a magnet. It connects to the Switch 2 so easily, and honestly, I'm a big fan of that technology that they are using. However, something I'm not a fan of is that this has the same technology within the Switch 1 when it comes to the sticks. It has been found when you open up the Joy-Con, it has the same stuff inside of what the Joy-Con 1 has, which means they have not done any updates to fixing the infamous Joy-Con drift, which drifting is probably going to be a very big issue with these controllers in about a year or two from now, because that's when it started to be noticeable. And if you're my editor Coleman, he's already experiencing Joy-Con drift somehow. Don't know what he's done with his Joy-Cons. You should ask him what he's been doing with that. At the end of the day, it's still very stupid that Nintendo still has this into these Joy-Cons. And I know someone in the comments is going to point out, but Nintendo will fix them. Yes, it's good that they're fixing them, but this is something that shouldn't need to be fixed. They shouldn't have used the same stuff that ended up being so controversial with the original Joy-Cons. Now, let me talk about something that I do like when it comes to these Joy-Cons. In fact, it is my favorite feature of the Nintendo Switch 2. There are mouse controls. You are able to use the Nintendo Switch 2 as a mouse, and there's so many games out there that have mouse controls. Something that I've been using a lot is Cyberpunk, for example, with the mouse controls. And after doing some editing with the settings, I have literally some of the perfect controls when it comes to the mouse. Perfect response time. It is honestly one of the coolest things that Nintendo has done, and I can't wait to see this be implemented in some of their first party games and whatever else they have coming for the system, because the mouse controls are the big gimmick of this. I'm thinking of things like Mario Paint or Mario Maker 3, or maybe Mario Maker 3 is going to have Mario Paint mechanics. I think the possibilities of these controls are endless, and honestly did not expect the responses of the mouse to be as accurate and as great onto this system compared to an actual mouse. But they've got it perfect, and I'm very happy with those controls. All right, the next thing that the Nintendo Switch 2 has that has been, I think, in my opinion, another gimmick they've been promoting with the system, because there's always gimmicks with these Nintendo systems, and that is game chat. Now, game chat is crazy that this is a gimmick in 2025, but Nintendo finally put game chat into their system. And honestly, I feel like they did it in a way that was actually pretty good. I was a big fan of this. I definitely was not excited to use it when it got announced, but now that it's here, I do see the advantages of having the Nintendo Switch 2 game chat. For example, I was in bed playing my Nintendo Switch 2. I saw some of my friends were online and they added me in. And you know, I was in the call playing the Nintendo Switch 2 and they could hear me very well while I was in bed playing the system. And I was like, wow, this is surprisingly good. The one thing that I am going to complain about when it comes to game chat is the fact that, and I'm sure this is something that we fixed, but this is something that shouldn't have been able to be fixed. It should have just been always an option. But once you start a room, you can't add more people in there. I think it's really stupid that you can't do that or get rid of people. I just feel like this concept was very confusing, and why they even made it to where you have to make a whole nother room. And if you don't want certain people in there or more people, it's very stupid. Did not like that implement at all. It was also just kind of confusing. I'm also not a fan of the sharing screen feature that they have with game chat, because it's literally 10 frames per second. Probably less than 10 frames if I'm honest. And I just feel like that defeats the purpose of sharing the screen, because you're gonna be like, oh, look at this awesome Final Fantasy VII Remake boss that I'm fighting, and it's 5 frames per second. I don't know, I feel like that was a pretty pointless feature, and they should have updated it to be at least 30 frames per second. I don't understand the decision of why it's not 30 frames, because I feel like that should be an option, especially if you're paying for servers with the Nintendo Switch Online membership. You should be able to have some sort of perk to where you have enough bandwidth to do share screens like that. Very confused by Nintendo on that decision. Speaking of Nintendo Switch Online, game chat is only going to be free for about a year from now. And I think that game chat is great, but it should have always been free. I don't think this should be a Nintendo Switch Online membership perk, especially considering that the Joy-Con has a mode to where you can easily turn on voice chat. Overall, I was definitely impressed with the quality that Nintendo put into game chat, especially the mic quality. I just wasn't expecting it to be that good, but it's surprisingly good. So props to Nintendo for that one. The last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 is the battery life of this system. Now, this is an issue with every handheld, I feel like. And as we get further into technology of these handhelds, it feels like that the battery life on each one just gets worse and worse. And I would think with the amount of money that you're putting into some of these handhelds, that they would be able to put that money into putting a good battery into this thing. The Steam Deck has the same issue, and the Switch 2 has the same issue. I am not a fan of the battery life of this system. Something that Nintendo was promoting is the fact that you can play games for about 2 to 6 hours onto this system. And I feel like everything that I have played onto this system is a little over 2 hours, maybe 3 if I'm lucky. I am not a fan of that. I feel like that the Nintendo Switch 2, at a minimum, you should be able to get 4 to 5 hours depending what game you're playing. Honestly, I feel like the most high-tech game, I should be able to get at least a guaranteed 3 hours. I think 2 hours is disappointing, and I just feel like compared to the Switch OLED and the Switch 1, these batteries continue to get worse. It's the same thing with the Steam Deck. The battery on that thing sucks as well. I'm very disappointed by the battery of this, but it's just something that continues to happen with these handhelds, and I'm sure it's going to get worse over time. And I know a lot of comments are gonna ask, did I do the whole battery trick to fix the Nintendo Switch 2? Mine wasn't affected by that, which is interesting because I think every Nintendo Switch 2 almost got affected by this whole battery issue, because I'm still still able to get the same amount of hours into these games. So it's one of those things. It's probably the only thing that I'm truly disappointed about when it comes to this system, and that's the battery life, because I feel like the big thing of the Nintendo Switch and all of these gaming handhelds is the fact that it's a handheld and you can take it on the go. I'm especially concerned about the battery with it being how it is already, and we're in the first year of the system. I feel like we're gonna get more powerful games 2 to 3 years from now when people start to learn more about this system. I feel like the battery could be less than 2 hours, honestly, with some of these games, but who knows? It's something that all gaming handhelds have when it comes to the battery. Overall though, I have greatly enjoyed my Nintendo Switch 2. Being able to play games like Cyberpunk onto this system has been truly incredible, as that was a game that I would have never imagined being able to play on a Nintendo platform on the first place, let alone looking as good as it does. And I'm sure with all the upcoming games that we have, such as Elden Ring, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and whatever other things that we don't know about, are going to look just as good on the Nintendo Switch 2, with features such as the DLSS that's been helping make these games look good on Switch 2. Not to mention, another perk of mine that I am very much loving about this system is being able to go back to some of these Switch 1 games and put them in, and they're running better already without a Switch 2 update. The Nintendo Switch 2, with its 1 month, is something I think that's very special with the system, and I am very pleased with what's going on with it. In terms of what I would give this system from a scale from 1 to 10, I would give the Switch 2 a 9 out of 10. I think the big issues with the system is the fact that they didn't release a big first-party, single-player, story-driven game, and on top of that, I feel like the fact that the battery life of this system is a big reason to why I don't have it as a 10. I'm excited though for the future of Nintendo Switch 2, and I bet as more games come out for this system, we'll be able to turn that 9 to probably like a 9.5. I'm just looking at it from a perspective of owning the system for 1 month, and I definitely think it's something that I would recommend you guys picking up, depending the type of games that you like, of course. If you're wanting that story-driven game, you're gonna have to wait another few weeks for Donkey Kong, but you might want more story-driven games, which we're going to be getting more of those, especially by the end of the year. However, I'm definitely very pleased with my Nintendo Switch 2, and I definitely am liking it more than the Switch 1. But guys, I would love to hear from you. How do you feel about the Nintendo Switch 2? What are the things that you love, hate, all that stuff in the comments below? Are you still satisfied with your purchase, owning it for 1 month, or did you just pick it up? Let me know all of that in the comments below, because I like this to be a discussion. I feel like all the discussion points though in the comments are going to be like, game key cards, which if you have those opinions, that's great. But let's try to mix up some other things than just talking about game key cards in the comments. Greatly appreciate it. Guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, Instagram, Discord, all that stuff that's in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace. Time to go play more Switch 2.